Welcome to the Real Python Podcast. This is episode 133. What if you didn't have to worry about managing user passwords as a Python developer? That's where the WebAuthn protocol and new hardware standards are heading. This week on the show, Dan Moore from FusionAuth returns to discuss a passwordless future. WebAuthn is a way to authenticate users using biometric, secure authentication methods. Dan dives into passkeys, ceremonies, authenticators, and hardware standards. We also cover several projects and libraries that could help you get started with WebAuthn in Python. This episode is brought to you by CData software, the easiest way to connect Python with data, SQL access to more than 250 cloud applications and data sources. All right, let's get started. The Real Python Podcast is a weekly conversation about using Python in the real world. My name is Christopher Bailey, your host. Each week, we feature interviews with experts in the community and discussions about the topics, articles, and courses found at realpython.com. After the podcast, join us and learn real-world Python skills with a community of experts at realpython.com. Hey, Dan, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we were talking back in episode 99. We were kind of diving into OAuth and sort of setting that up and maybe some potential Python solutions there. And you recently reached out to me after, I guess you had just written this article about WebAuthn. Is that how it's pronounced?
Yeah, I pronounce it WebAuthn for sure.
Good, yeah, because there's lots of acronyms and stuff we'll be diving into today. And I know it's not the most deepest Python-ish kind of like subject, but I am fascinated by this technology and I want to know more about it. And I think anybody who develops stuff on the web, I really see this affecting them and hopefully getting us beyond a password sort of future here, because I know that's been the dream for a while. And so I'm very excited to talk about it.
Yeah, it definitely, like you said, the core of WebAuthn is really built into browsers and the JavaScript API, but anybody who builds web applications or websites where people log in should have this on their radar, because the long and short of it is it makes it easy to leverage strong forms of authentication like biometrics or things that are built into your phone, fingerprint readers, etc., into a web application without you having to do the heavy integration lifting. So that's why I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. And it attacks the problem from a slightly different angle. And we're going to provide a lot of resources. And your article was really great. It was WebAuthn Explained on your FusionAuth blog. Is it just FusionAuth Developer? Expert advice for developers sort of series there.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to have lots of little acronyms we're going to kind of work through, talk about maybe some differences there. What I want to start with first is I had heard about, I think it was called the FIDO Alliance, and then heard more about WebAuthn after that. Maybe you could describe the difference between those two to get some people up to speed as to what's happening there.
Sure, yeah. So the FIDO Alliance started in the early 2010s, and I think PayPal was a member and some other folks, and FIDO stands for Fast Identity Online. And so they were a group of companies that really realized that we needed to have better ways to authenticate quickly, mostly because they wanted users to have a better experience and a more secure experience. And they came out with a couple of standards. And one thing that's maybe familiar to some of your users or some of your, you don't have users, you have listeners. Some of your listeners are YubiKeys.
Yeah, I was thinking about that.
Yep. And so in the mid 2010s, the FIDO folks got together with the folks at the W3C, I want to say 2016, 2017, and came up with like a second version of this passwordless system. And this one leverages some of the work they've previously done. And then also there's a portion of it that's built into the browser. So you can imagine there's like a pipeline between the end user, some kind of authentication device, right, like a YubiKey or Face ID or phone or something like that, and then the browser, and then a website. And so
Okay.
WebAuthn handles the interactions between the browser and the website. And then there's a second protocol called CTAP, which handles communication between the browser and the authenticators, what it's called, which is the thing that actually does the actual authentication, that does secrets management and some other things. That's kind of the secret sauce behind why WebAuthn is like passwordless and secure.
Yeah.
And it's worth noting that CTAP can be actually used by not just a browser, but it could be like a desktop application or something like that.
Okay. So we were talking about like Apple TVs and stuff before too, and some of these other like, I don't know, third devices in the home. Could it be used for something like that too?
I think those third devices are probably, if they're actual real applications, then yes. If they're web applications, then they're probably going to be using WebAuthn.
Okay. Maybe we could describe what a YubiKey is. And the other question I have about that is like, how many of them are probably even out there? Like, how many what was it a popular device for people to buy? There was a recent action that happened in the Python space where the Python Packaging Authority took the top 1% of all packaging projects that are most downloaded and offered every one of those projects one of the keys.
Mm-hmm.
Or they could, if they chose not to, they could still use some other form of two-factor, multi-factor authentication.
Sure.
But they really wanted to make sure all those projects at least had that going. And so I was just intrigued by like, okay, well, I think that was like maybe 1,000 or something like that. But is it something that's huge in the corporate world? And
yeah, so I don't have a great grasp on that, right?
Okay.
I definitely know YubiKeys are totally aimed. There are consumers who have YubiKeys, but I think they're mostly the sysadmin folks who are kind of really serious about security anyway. What WebAuthn opens up is and one of the reasons why WebAuthn is exciting is that all the browsers on all the operating systems support it. So there's things that are integrated in with the operating system, like Android fingerprint, Face ID, Touch ID, Windows Hello, and those all leverage the same, are accessible via the same WebAuthn APIs.
So a lot more hardware.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're looking at like consumer, logins for consumers, asking someone to buy a YubiKey is kind of a lift, because I think they're tens of dollars, right? They're not super expensive, but they're...
Yeah, I went to look on Amazon because I found like a link.
Yeah.
And it was like maybe $50 to $60 depending on the type of connector, like USB A or C or what have you.
And I would totally spend, I would definitely let my employer spend $60 on me, right? But like, if you're asking me to log into like, all my personal accounts, it's gonna be a big lift. But certainly, it's I already have my phone, right? And many people do, or I already have my computers. So that's really where I think WebAuthn is, and kind of the surrounding ecosystem is a step above what FIDO was doing in the early 2010s, because you just have way more hardware available for people to use.
Yeah. It's many, many generations now. I think it was a iPhone 5S or something like that. Started Touch ID.
Yeah.
Something like that. So that's a lot of generations ago.
I looked up for a talk, and I think it was 2013. It was first.
Okay.
Touch ID was first made available. And a little bit of trivia for you all. The first phone with a built-in fingerprint reader was actually the Motorola Ultrix in 2011. So it's been around.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And 11 years is a long time in digital terms, for sure.
Right. And then there's the whole, Android ecosystem, and almost all of those have some sort of either facial recognition or a fingerprint also. So,
a
lot of phones out there. So I would imagine that would be probably the most common hardware kind of coming in.
Yes.
Is there something special that you need to download or set up on your phone to do this? Or is it just something that when you go to a particular website, it will, through the authentication system, like trigger sort of a lookup on your phone? Like, how's that work?
So there's a couple of things. First is you obviously need to enable fingerprint recognition or whatever on your phone or your device.
Yeah.
If that's not enabled, then WebAuthn is not going to magically be able to enable it for you.
Right.
But
got to turn it on.
So WebAuthn works with kind of public-private keys, and the private keys are held on the device, the phone or the YubiKey or whatnot, and then the public keys are what the website gets. And there's some more kind of nuts and bolts there, but at the end of the day, that's really the fundamental exchange. And so WebAuthn has these things called ceremonies, but you call them flows as well. And you need to, as a user, be able to basically get that public key up to the website and associate with your account somehow. And there's a couple different ways to do that. One common way is you have someone log in with a normal username and password or SSO using Google or something like that. And then they can associate a public key with their account. And then they can use that WebAuthn workflow, or the passkey workflow is another way that I've heard it put, for all future authentications if they want.
Okay. So it's like a sort of a setup initial process, create your username.
Yep. It's called a registration flow. Yep.
Okay. And then when you said SSO, single sign-on, we'll talk about the risks of some of these existing sort of standards as we go, but that would be like, sign on with Google or GitHub or some other thing where, if you will, a third party that has, I don't know, maybe a larger set of accounts in your life that it kind of makes sense. Well, I'll just have a single sign-on for all of those. And that was like one of the solutions that's been out there for a while for trying to remember lots of passwords.
Yes, you basically delegate that, because I don't know about you, Christopher, but like I pay a lot more attention to like my Gmail account than I do to JRandom site.
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
Like I have MFA enabled for it, and so that's the premise behind single sign or social sign on. But so there are ways you can set up WebAuthn so that you don't have to have that initial account creation. They're just a little more limited in terms of the way the hardware works. And my experience is definitely more focused on the re-authentication flow right now, because at the end of the day, it really is about reducing user friction.
Yeah.
And authentication is a big friction point in my life.
CData software. Connect, integrate, and automate your data from Python or any other application or tool. At CData, they simplify connectivity between all of the applications and data sources that power business, making it easier to unlock the value of data. Their SQL-based connectors streamline data access, making it easy to access real-time data from on-premise or cloud databases, SaaS, APIs, NoSQL, and big data. Check out CData.com. That's CDATA.com to learn more. Maybe we could dive into that a little bit further, like the idea of a public key and a private key is kind of a similar behavior that, if anyone has explored like HTTPS and sort of that workflow, in fact, you in your article used the same kind of people in there, the Alice and Bob example, which I think is like sort of like a textbook example of people. But now we're kind of doing it with this sort of other form of authentication. But the idea of like you sending this public key out, and then only you are able to create something that is privately signed. And it's, I guess, very hard to tamper with because it won't look like you anymore. And so that whole, like you mentioned it as I've heard it called a challenge. You called it what was the term that you used, that where it's sort of prompting the person for the private key signature?
I don't recall what I said. I'm sorry.
It's just saying, well, you have to sort of prove that you, as the username, that please sign this challenge with your private key, and here's the signature.
Maybe the piece of hardware I was talking about is called an authenticator.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's kind of a generic term for anything that holds the private keys and can verify who the user is, and then
right. There's sort of the ceremony signature of it or whatever.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And so what I thought of is a bit of an analogy. I don't know if it works perfectly, but you've given out your username, this sort of public key. And I was kind of thinking about like, okay, like maybe you've given some sort of tool that can read invisible ink, but you have a personal recipe for creating invisible ink and signing something in it, and only you can write it in that way, and it can only be viewed with that particular, that public view. It would not show up the same. It'd be easy to kind of tell that somebody's sort of tampered with it or tried to create it in a different way. It's like having your own unique way of looking at it. I don't know if it works that well, but
I love that. No, it's almost like, yeah, you're right. Like I've given the entire world a flashlight that can read my invisible ink only.
yeah.
Right. And so I can write in that invisible ink. And if someone else tries to write with a different kind of visible ink, that flashlight won't show them won't show anybody who holds it the message.
Or it's going to be easy to tell it's been tampered with, right? So,
yeah.
What I was wondering about, one of the things I thought was kind of interesting is that you have a chart mentioning sort of the browser support and kind of where things are. And I was looking at the list of all the different, authentication API sort of stuff. And I was wondering, do you think Internet Explorer was holding this back in some ways?
Well, and that chart, credit where credit's due, that's from caniuse.com, which is just an amazing website if you want to know about specifics. If you just search for can I use WebAuthn, I think they're like the number one result. I think that IE just probably the Microsoft team just decided that they were all in on Edge and it wasn't worth doing that update. So yeah, that's my guess. I don't have any inside information.
Yeah. So one of the things that this helps with, and why it should be interesting to a developer, is the idea that you are really no longer holding on to passwords. And the whole ritual of potentially, you get a password and then, okay, am I going to save this password in my system? Hence why people prefer in some ways to maybe use single sign-on on their site. So it's like, okay, well, the third party can authenticate and I don't have to like collect all that information.
Mm-hmm.
But also just the whole process of making sure that you're properly hashing or salting. And even then, that information can get attacked or taken from the site. And we hear about those sort of breaches all the time. And in this case, there's really not any kind of secret that's saved there, right?
Yeah. There's the public key, right? Which by definition is something that no one cares if
right. It's a username, if you will, right?
Yeah. I mean, you could think of it as a username, because it does kind of, there might be some metadata attached to it as well. But yes, it is nothing that will actually help you complete a WebAuthn workflow or is useful in any other way. So
without any server-side secrets there, it kind of makes it really not an attack vector that would be interesting anymore.
Yeah, and the WebAuthn folks actually have introduced some other things too. They've, because they came out later, it doesn't work at all over HTTP. You just can't use WebAuthn over HTTP. It just won't work.
All right.
And every kind of that registration ceremony that we talked about that happens for the website to get the credential or the public key, that is bound to a domain name. And if you make a request, but you kind of pass in a different domain name from where you're serving from, WebAuthn again says, hey, no dice.
Yeah.
So there's like this more strong kind of tying to the domain name system, which makes it harder for attackers to try to get access to those credentials or even that signed payload that proves someone is who they are without somehow getting into your website.
So that like a phishing attack would be less, like it would be much harder to do, or maybe not even possible.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how your website's configured and how you ask for things, because you can ask for not just a specific example .com domain, but you could ask for, let anybody underneath example.com, do the WebAuthn. But yeah, if you architect things correctly, it becomes harder. And the other point about phishing, I'm glad you brought that up, is that lots of times, and we saw this with, I think, the Okta attack and some other attacks that have happened recently, people get phished for their second factor of authentication. Right. Someone says, they get a text message or maybe 100 text messages or 100 push notifications, and eventually they say yes, or someone calls and says, hey, what's that code? You can do that with code-based MFA, but with WebAuthn, you can't actually hand over the the signature, right? It's tied, it's bound to that device.
Yeah.
So it helps with phishing in both ways.
Yeah, so I have I don't really use it much, but I have an Instagram account that I created, and it's a single word, and it's a dictionary word, and I don't use it, and it's got 3 posts or something on it, and I constantly get the emails of somebody saying,
yeah,
it seems like you're having trouble getting into your account, da da da, and I never did the part of set up an SMS type of thing, which I'm kind of glad, because it probably would be gone by now.
right.
At this point, if somebody would have probably taken it, because that seems easier to hack, this is an opinion, than, especially for somebody who's trying to get that elite single word login or something like that for Instagram or something like that. But it just it baffles me. But, there's all those kinds of things where you can sort of spoof SMS, or they call them your SIMs or whatever.
Right. So I have 2 questions there. The first is the single word Python? I have to ask that question.
No.
And the second is more of a comment. I think SMS is is definitely spoofable. The attacks I've heard of often depend on them knowing your phone number and them calling up the mobile phone operator and the customer service people switching things around.
I heard of several attacks like that. I hope I'm never on the side of that type of thing, but yeah, it's pretty wild to think about. And I've definitely moved to the other types of, multi-factor type of authentication systems, like Google Authenticator or Authy, I think. So I have,
those time.
It's always a challenge when you get a new phone.
Got to move everything over.
How would this deal with that? What happens if you get new hardware?
Yeah. So the thing about WebAuthn is, unless you're using something, so there are some kind of vendor specific ways around this, but for the straight up standard, you have to register each new device. So what you would do is, you go through that same registration process, and then depending on how the website is implemented things, they may offer you a choice. Hey, I see you have 3 WebAuthn accounts or public keys associated with your account. Which one do you want to log in with?
Okay. Yeah. So I know in the Apple world, they are trying to do it through iCloud, and they have their term, I think, is a passkey.
Yep.
That they're kind of using. So if you're in the Apple ecosystem, and I'm sorry, I used to work for Apple, so I'm a bit of an Apple nerd. So I have a lot of their stuff. Plus I bought a lot of music equipment and stuff that only works on it. So
sure.
And I actually was kind of checking out, I have one of the developer accounts, and they had a WWDC talk on it that was in 2021. And I won't share the link because you can't log into it, but it's basically, the title of it was Move Beyond Passwords. And it was a pretty good explanation, kind of diving into this a little bit more. Mm-hmm. I think it might be a good, one if you move, go through your article and kind of catch up what some of the stuff's happening. And then you can kind of see how a hardware provider is kind of looking at how to do this and set up their developers for it. And they show a little bit of code at the end. So
yeah, and I think there is WebAuthn is still under development, or not under development. It's been released. I think it was released in 2019, finalized, but now they're working on the next version.
Okay.
Which I think will try to solve that problem. So they're working with Apple and Google, who have these solutions that, frankly, private keys should never leave devices. That's one of the premises of WebAuthn.
Right.
But then the cost is you have to register all these new devices. And if you lose a device and you don't have any other device registered for that account, you're hosed, I think is the technical term.
Right. It's like dropping your YubiKey somewhere or something.
Totally.
Yeah.
So I think they're working on secure storage in the cloud of that private key, which obviously they can encrypt and ship over TLS and do some other things with. But I do know that there are proprietary solutions right now, and I think that the WebAuthn working group is working on ways to standardize that and try to solve that user interface issue.
So maybe we could talk about where are places that you're seeing this being used? What are sites or places that are actively using it? Is this something that you can choose like if you already have a YubiKey or whatever, that you could have like selected a particular site to do this on. Like, I guess I haven't started to use it yet. And so I'm like, okay, well, where does this look different for me if I've decided to move into it as a user? And then we could talk out as a developer maybe after that.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So I definitely know that it's used. The only consumer facing site that I've seen it on is Best Buy.
Okay.
Which makes sense, kind of knowing their target market. I definitely have read about people using it as another factor of authentication for, their GitHub account or Azure AD.
Okay.
I think it's that point where if Best Buy is implementing it, I think there's some momentum behind it. I think there's going to be more and more sites out there building this in.
Yeah, the big one I think of is Amazon.
Yeah.
Just like the marketplace of it. So
right. Yeah.
That makes me think about something too. Then is like, my wife is the one who has an account for Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
Like she's the prime. It's like sort of the family member. Yeah. And so I have to sort of log in as her, and then it prompts like her phone, to prompt for a code or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder how that would be handled, like with families. Is that something they would have to think about with like multiple hardware then, as far as like an account that's somewhat like that might be shared?
I mean, the way I'd approach it is the same as like if I want to have WebAuthn work with my Mac and my Android device, I register both devices under the same account.
Have to go and in the sort of setup process that we were talking about before, there'd be like additional like things that you're registering as.
Yep. And so you'd have your phone and she'd have her phone. And if I were Amazon and I was doing this, I would definitely, anyone who only had one device, I would send them emails and nag them to add more, because again, you just don't want to have someone drop their phone.
Yeah. It's literally like, getting mall credit cards. So.
For sure.
Okay. All right. So that it's sort of rolling out, and I guess it's sort of a chicken and egg. You need the hardware all set up and ready to go and be part of the operating systems and stuff like that. And at the same time, then, the websites need to figure out how they're going to implement it and start setting that up, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, and actually, I just thought of another. I think Intuit was using it as well. So there are a couple of.
Okay, that would be really handy.
Yeah. So I think it's not a chicken and egg problem, because to use your analogy, like the chicken's already taken care of, right? Like,
okay,
for whatever reason, probably because they want to make our lives more secure.
Right.
All the browser vendors and all the OS vendors have built this in. So now it's a real question of your audience, the web developers, stepping up and actually implementing this on their web applications so that users can get the benefits of it. And I won't speak too much about the benefits of it from a user perspective, but I know the first time I did it, it really does seem like magic, because it is, you basically click on a button saying, hey, this is my username essentially.
Yeah.
And then you get a prompt that comes up and you hold your fingerprint over it and boom, you're logged in.
Nice.
And for someone who's used to just continue, I have a password manager, continually copying and pasting from my password manager. It was just amazingly frictionless.
Yeah. I have two. I'm not proud of the fact that I have two password managers, but I got a new laptop this year, and so I kind of started to go all in on the Touch ID and the I don't know, it's called the iCloud keychain, what have you. And so it does sort of, maybe it's a similar flow where it prompts me, use your fingerprint now, to basically prompt me to put in the password and username and password, and that actually works pretty well.
Is that for web applications, or is that for like internal stuff like your IDE, or just logging on to your Mac?
Well, it's to log onto my Mac and wake it up from sleep, but then also, since it stores all my passwords in that iCloud keychain, or a large percentage of them, I should say, it's the same thing. Like I'm logging into a credit card, or I'm logging into other services and things like that.
Nice.
And it actually works pretty well. But I also have one password, and that's partly a work thing. And Honestly, it's kind of clunky. And I end up copying, pasting out of it because like the way it would prompt, it would fight with the other one.
Sure.
And I'm like, ah.
Sure.
And so it was like kind of like having to go back and forth between the browsers and things like that. And I know a lot of people probably do the same thing of like, you're in a browser and you have it maybe remember passwords inside the browser. Like, maybe you do certain things in Firefox or, Brave or some other kind of browser. And you say, well, this thing could save some of the passwords too. But that's still not completely secure in some ways. So the passwords are there. I don't know if there have been some hacks of password manager services like LastPass and things like that. I don't know of all of them, but
I thought I heard about that. I mean, I don't want to spread FUD, but I mean,
right, yeah.
Certainly like if I were an attacker, a centralized repository of users' passwords and usernames would be very attractive to me. And that gets back to your point earlier, right? Like WebAuthn is decentralized. And so if LastPass was somehow holding all these public keys, no one cares.
Yeah.
So
this week, I want to shine a spotlight on another RealPython video course. It's another of this new type of video course we're having on RealPython. Instead of being based on one of our written tutorials, it's a conversation about code. For this conversation, it's about how to prepare your code so it's ready to share when looking for help or support from other programmers or a community. The course is titled Refactoring: Prepare Your Code to Get Help. And the instructors for this code conversation are RealPython authors Philip Akseni and previous guest Martin Broyce. They'll take you through how to write clear, concise questions using how or why, removing obstacles and visual clutter from your code, renaming variables and functions for clarity, exploring several techniques to improve your code by refactoring, and how to raise and catch exceptions within nested functions. Throughout this code conversation, you'll get insight from two RealPython team members, whether you're looking for help from within the RealPython community or the larger Python community. I think this course will help you prepare your code for these conversations. RealPython video courses are broken into easily consumable sections, and where needed, include code examples for the techniques shown. All lessons have a transcript, including closed captions. Check out the video course. You can find a link in the show notes, or you can find it using the enhanced search tool on realpython.com.
Can we talk about the Python pieces?
Yeah. Let's talk to the developer side, because I think that's really the next step is like, okay, well, how do we set this up? And I think there probably are some different choices. And, being it kind of a new platform or new technology for developers, I was wondering like what level these things are at. And so I guess we'll kind of discuss them. So what do you got?
Yeah. So again, if you want to think about the whole like registration ceremony or authentication ceremony, right? There's kind of two distinct pieces. There's generating the options that you need for the particular authenticator to be recognized, and that's done via just creating some options in JavaScript. And so I found a couple, at least one library that does that for you in Python. You basically build out what you want in Python. In terms of, there aren't too many options, but like one is, do you want to support only authenticators that are built into like a computer or a phone, and those are called platform authenticators?
Okay.
Or do you want to support cross-platform authenticators, where cross-platform means it's like a YubiKey that you can move between different like computing devices? And so that is taken care of by something called pi_WebAuthn. But there's the other piece of like all that credential management, right? Like, prompting the user and then saving off the public key and then knowing how to attach it to the user.
Yeah.
And I found a framework for that one worked with Flask, and it was called PyWarp. And there was another one that I think works with Flask and Chalice, I want to say, and that was called WebAuthn RP. And again, for all your listeners, we'll have all these in the links.
Yeah.
I did look into Django because I know that's kind of one of the big web frameworks with Python.
Yeah, we
and,
talk about it often. Yeah.
there were a couple alpha level projects, and they basically were very clear that they said, "Hey, we're alpha level." So I think
Right.
they're probably looking for help. But one's called Django WebAuth, and the other is called Django WebAuthn.
Okay.
With an IN. Both those didn't seem like they were quite ready for prime time.
Okay. So there's some movement there, and so people can kind of look at them. The trick here is, do you think that someone would probably be having to set up, multiple like choices for authentication at the moment?
I don't understand the question. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Do you think that if you were going to create a Flask website and you were interested in setting up WebAuthn, do you think that at the current time that you might have to probably have additional choices also?
Yes, I think you would. And I think that there's two main reasons for that. The first is that registration flow that we talked about is much easier to conceptualize and much more widely supported if you have an existing account to hang that public key off of.
Okay.
And the second is the reset problem, right? Like, what happens if I register with WebAuthn and I only have one device on there, and then I lose it? Well, if I have, I can always call customer service and kind of try to convince them that I have access to that account, or I should have access to that account. But
Right.
we live in an automated world, and so if you can associate an email address with it, or some other phone number, then you can build in those self-service auth reset flows, which
that's pretty common.
Are an attack vector, but also are such a convenience. So
right, yeah, that's always going to be a thing, right? You're going to need to have a way to recover if something goes odd, because how much of your life is online.
So much.
And yeah, so
I did want to mention one other kind of Python-esque tool, which, if you'll remember, there's the WebAuthn side, which is kind of website to browser, and then there's the CTAP2 side, which is browser to authenticator, and they're all kind of called FIDO. There's actually a tool called Python-FIDO2 by the YubiKey folks that lets you kind of manipulate and access FIDO stuff from the command line. So if you're you need to generate some challenge, or you're integrating with something that's not a website, you may want to look at that tool, that library.
Yeah. So if you're in that world of with the hardware keys. Yeah, cool.
Well, no. It should conceivably. I haven't played with this directly, but because it supports the FIDO standard, it should actually be able to work with Touch ID or any of those other things.
Okay.
And it's not just a YubiKey specific tool, I don't believe.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
I guess another potential way that someone could look at this is maybe through an authentication service. I know you work for FusionAuth, and we can throw the name out there again, but is that something that in the world of services that do this, is that something that you guys have started to implement, and some of your competitors and other people out there are in the process of getting set up for?
Yeah, so we are about to release WebAuthn support.
Okay.
And so it'll be as simple as like clicking a toggle if you have an existing FusionAuth instance. I will note it's part of our paid license plan. And then I know there are some other competitors out there. Keycloak has a WebAuthn implementation. I'm trying to think of the others that are kind of prominent. Ori does, Stitch does. So there are a couple of competitors out there that are Auth0 does, although my understanding is that Auth0's is kind of hidden behind a talk to sales type of process. But I think that you absolutely could implement this yourself, and hopefully some of the links to some of the libraries that will be in this podcast note will do that.
Yeah. But
you absolutely could also rely on an auth server too.
Yeah, I was just thinking, just like, kind of a state of affairs kind of thing. Like, the more this is out there, the more public awareness of it is, and more sites that are using it. And hopefully we can all move toward this passwordless future.
Yeah, and I would also say it's not just the passwords of the future that excites me; it's the standards-based passwordless future, because there's actually been passwordless solutions out there that have been proprietary for a while longer. But this one, it has just mass adoption, and I think you're right that the hope is that a lot more websites are going to start to offer this. Again, maybe not the only way to log in, but a safe, secure way to let people re-authenticate or add an additional factor of authentication to just increase the ease and the user security for everyone.
Yeah. So Dan, I have these weekly questions I'd like to ask you. And I know that you're not a regular Python developer at all times, but what is something that you're excited about in the world of Python that you've been hearing about?
Yeah, so there's two things actually when I was looking around. The first is that PyCon 2023, the US one, just opened their CFP. So, I speak a lot at different conferences and stuff, and I'm definitely excited about the possibility of submitting to PyCon.
Yeah, back at Salt Lake City again this year.
Well, and I would encourage anybody to, if you've thought about public speaking, it is, how do I put this politely? You will never learn something so well as when you're preparing to give a talk on it. So if you have something like, oh man.
Yeah. And especially in person, right?
Oh gosh. I'd love to learn more about WebAuthn. You should pitch a talk to PyCon 2023 about WebAuthn, because I guarantee you, if you get accepted, you will suddenly become one of the smartest people in the room about WebAuthn, because you'll put in that work.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, obviously, I love to see programming languages evolve, and I noticed that 3.11 was released. So congratulations to the Python folks for continuing to push that forward.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. There's lots of fun changes and a lot of activity, a lot of development happening. It almost feels too fast sometimes. So with a yearly release cadence, it's kind of made it a little bit quicker in what's going on. So what's something that you want to learn next? And again, this doesn't have to be programming or even Python specific.
Sure. One thing I want to learn is, even in the short time we've kind of been building out the WebAuthn stuff, I've seen a lot of interesting edge cases. And so I'm really looking forward to FusionAuth getting that released in the wild and being able to continually refine that, because standards are standards, but there's always edge cases. And then I'm trying to think if there's any fun. You know what? I know this is pretty how do I put this? Trendy of me, but I really have enjoyed pickling some things, and my wife got me a book about pickling things, and so I'm going to be doing more of that, just kind of preserving foods.
I've dabbled more in the as we call it, quickle.
Quickle.
It's just kind of quick pickling different things. Yeah, I make kind of red onions to be for kind of making fish tacos at home.
Nice.
And so it's lime juice and maybe a little bit of red vinegar, and then mostly just thinly cut and some salt, and just put it in a mason jar, shake it up, and oh my God, they're so good.
Awesome. Awesome. That's great.
Yeah. What kind of things do you pickle?
I've done sauerkraut. I've done
kind of advanced stuff.
Kimchi. I actually really, really love kimchi.
Yeah.
And then I tried to pickle turnips the other day, and I'll let you know how that.
Okay.
It didn't taste as good as the sauerkraut. Let's just leave it at that. But it's kind of working at it right now. So
nice. Yeah. Maybe you can share the book name, and we'll put it in the show notes too.
Yeah, I definitely will.
Well, Dan, thanks so much for coming on the show again. It's really fun to talk to you again. And thanks for sharing all this information about WebAuthn.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. And if I could leave your listeners with one piece of advice, is go sign up for Best Buy's WebAuthn account and just see how easy and fun it is, and think about your users having that same experience on your website.
Okay, awesome. And don't forget CData software, simple cloud data connectivity to SaaS, big data, and NoSQL. From Pandas, SQL Alchemy, Dash, and Pedal. Learn more at cdata.com. I want to thank Dan Moore for coming on the show this week. And I want to thank you for listening to the Real Python podcast. Make sure that you click that follow button in your podcast player. And if you see a subscribe button somewhere, remember that the Real Python podcast is free. If you like the show, please leave us a review. You can find show notes with links to all the topics we spoke about inside your podcast player or at realpython.com/podcast. And while you're there, you can leave us a question or a topic idea. I've been your host, Christopher Paley, and look forward to talking to you soon.